Another technique for applying watercolor paint is to actually use stencils. It might not seem like the best idea to use stencils with such a watery medium like watercolor paint, but stenciling is actually a really interesting way to add the paint, and because of the bleeding and because of the watery nature of it, some interesting effects happen. So I've got some regular stencils. These are plastic, that way they'll resist the water and won't be damaged by the watercolor paint. I've got some plastic canvas. This is the stuff that you can buy at a craft store, and normally users would stitch yarn through it, but we're going to use it as a stencil. Some metal that has some holes punched out of it, and then this is a piece of plastic off of something that has a diamond shape in it, and we can easily use this as a stencil. So let's go ahead and use the mesh first. So I'm going to lay this down over my page. I'm going to get a brush, big brush, little brush, doesn't really matter, but the technique is pretty much the same no matter what stencil I am using. I want to fill the paintbrush with water and then get some paint. I'll use this red orange. And then what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to paint it, I actually have to get the bristles down into the little holes in the mesh. So I'm just going to tap it in, get a little bit more paint. If I wanted to, I could use the whole piece and do this all over, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to do a little bit here and a little bit there. And because the paint is runny, because it is watery, it is going to get down underneath the mesh, and there will be some runs and some pooling of the watercolor paint. But that's a really interesting effect, and that's just part of the process. You're not going to get this perfect little grid pattern from this. Okay, so once I have a little bit of that, I can go ahead and pull this off. And so there has been a little bit of puddling and pooling, but I still can see the lines where the mesh was. And it's the same technique with the diamonds, and I can turn this either way. Just lay this down, rinse out my brush, because I'm going to change colors, wipe it off. Let's use brown. So it's the same technique. I'm just going to take and tap into those diamonds. And this is plastic as well. I want to use plastic stencils. I can use paper stencils, but the water will get into the paper and eventually destroy the paper stencils. Now, since this is a small piece, if I want to repeat this, I'm just going to move it to a different section. Okay. Alright, and one more up here. So stenciling is actually a really good way to apply the watercolor paint. And I do like the fact that it's not perfect, that it bleeds, there are edges that are incomplete. I'm not going to do this one, but I will do the letters, or the numbers. And I'm just going to lay these down. And it's the same thing. I'm going to try to get rid of a lot of that water because I don't want it to bleed as much. I'm going to go ahead and use a red. And what I'm going to do is, again, just tap it into the stencil. And I do want to try to hold the edges of the stencil down. These numbers are pretty big. So I want to kind of hold them down so that the water is less likely to run underneath and to bleed underneath. But this isn't going to give me a perfect stencil. It's not going to give me a perfect number. And that's fine. It's just kind of using the watercolor and the stencil to get some color and some shapes down. And if it bleeds, that's okay. And if I can't read the numbers or the letters, that's alright too. And the nice thing with the stencils is that I can use them as a stamp. Since they have paint on them, I can stamp them down as well and get rid of some of that paint and transfer some of that. Okay, and so there I have the beginnings of another page.